Welcome, everybody. I have done a little bit of housework, I guess, before starting. I've created a new branch. I'm just going to branch every time we start a stream, and then I'll commit those branches and pull them in to the main branch in the repo. For anybody who wants the repo, it is right here on GitHub. It's a publicly available repo. You can download it, do whatever you want with it. I don't believe there's a license on it. If there is, it should be BSD or MIT. But you're free to do with the code as you wish. Let's see. I was doing a bit of looking around before the stream, and I noticed I didn't do, which is a good thing to do with Volta, is pin the version of Node that you're using. And an easy way to see if you've got Volta pinned is just come into your package.json, and if it's not there, then you haven't pinned it. So let's do a Volta list. And currently we are on node 16. That'll be fine. So we'll Volta pin, and we'll pin our node at 16. Oh, so now we're on 16.15. And we'll also pin our NPM at version 8. And so now, inside of our package.json, then we can see that we've pinned node and npm to the versions that we're currently using. That means that anytime we come back in, or anybody who uses this and has Volta installed on their machine, Volta will instantly download the version of Node that we're using and the version of npm and make sure that they get the same version. If we look now, we can see that we're on Node 16.15.1, and if we run npm, we can also see that we're on 8.12.1. So we'll always be pinned to that version as we come back to Node. We can always change the pin using the same command, volta pin. You know, we can update our version of Volta or Node or whatever as need be. So let's go ahead and commit that. Oh, guess what? I did the wrong one. I'll need to delete that branch. Let's go open our Angular Sudoku. Let's branch that. And we will, let's see, pinned npm and node. Commit that change. And so we should be good there. The next thing that I typically like to do is I just like to look at an npm outdated. Just make sure that, you know, my packages are mostly up to date. I don't know that we'll go through updating packages today, but it's just something I like to get into the habit of doing and making sure that, you know, I'm not falling too far behind. So Angular 14, I'd love to upgrade to Angular 14, but we're waiting for NX. Storybook Essentials has a new version. Maybe we'll take a look at that. Actually, it looks like all of Storybook is updated. The linters, we might take a look at that later, but it doesn't look like, oh, RxJS is 7.5.5. We'll leave it all as is right now. So at the end of the last stream, we were doing, we were running a storybook on our components. So we'll go ahead and build this with Storybook. But one of the things that was really strange is our component that we were using for the input was the entire length of the screen. So for the cell, we can use a decorator to actually control how big that should be. So we'll go ahead and do that. The other thing we'll do that I wanted to do at the end of the last stream was size the grid. The grid should be square, and each of the cells within the grid should be square. The other thing I noticed is that we weren't binding the inputs properly, I think, because we weren't getting values in the inputs for the cells. Just another couple of things to clean up to get things looking right. And then today I'd like to get into kind of some user interaction with the grid using Storybook, get that grid built and working well. And then actually going in and starting to build the component, build the actual application. But I'd like to have our components. I just want to try out this new workflow of using Storybook to drive the application instead of building the application first and then going to Storybook and trying to make that work. Okay, let's pull this over and do a little bit of looking here, just to remind ourselves of what we had last time. So we built the cell, and we've got our primary cell. We've got the has error. Last time we were we got some great advice on how to build a color picker to be able to control the background. And we'll continue to use that as we keep moving through. And then we started with the grid, and it looks like the grid isn't rendering, even though last time it was. So we'll have to take a look at that and see what's going on there. But the first thing we can do is let's make this cell actually square. It shouldn't stretch clear across the screen like that. And I did a little bit of research and discovered we can use decorators. So let's pull up our cell story, our cell component stories. And within the default export, we can actually add some decorators. So what we can do is we can use the component wrapper, capital W on wrapper, decorator. And this decorator takes in a function, our story. We'll just add a div. And inside of this div, we can just inject our story. And here we can, let's do, we'll do a height of, we'll start with 2.5 rem and see how that works. And a width of 2.5 rem. And that's not a comma, it's a semicolon. And when we go back to our story, interesting. So our control resized, but obviously our input didn't. So let's go see what is causing that issue, because it would be nice if this component resized so that as we made this bigger, this would be almost the perfect size. I think it would look pretty good. You know, if we had a value in here, yeah, that would look really good. You know what? That's another thing I'm not sure about. I don't really think the up and down arrows are going to give much to us, and that's a good call out too. We'll clean that up too. Good call out on that one, because it's just going to eat up part of the input. So let's pull open our cell component and our input here. Let's pull open our SCSS and look at our input. Let's just do width of 100%. See what that does for us. Not much. Let's go ahead and inspect this. We can see that we've got padding on the input. The div itself, we have padding on the div? I thought we added some padding to the div. Host. It's got to display a block. Yeah, we did add some padding to the div. We probably want to do some box sizing on this. And I wonder if it's this input that's causing our issue. We'll take the input away from number for now. That may be the smart course of action. And then when we go to validate the input later on, we can think about how we actually want to do this. So we'll just put this back to just a classic input for right now. That should solve a lot of our problems. Actually, I wonder if I need to do a little bit more styling because we've got the padding inside of this div. I wonder if we take the padding off the div, instead we add a margin to the input. So if we do, instead of this, let's see if that solves some of our issue too. So let's take a look at this. Let's see if we take this width out, we're this big. I'm learning how to do CSS better by forcing myself to do it in pure CSS and not using a library. I think what we're missing because that padding should be resizing it. I think we're missing a box sizing or something like that. So if we look, if we inspect this div, I think if on this div, we just add our box sizing, border box, and maybe on the input too. That's what we're looking for. What I'm thinking is that we just go into our HTML and we go into our style.scss, and inside of here, we're just going to do star box sizing border box. Why did that not get the border box? So it looks like I need a few more styles to make this work. So we just need to be a little bit more. Storybook must not be picking that up. Oh no, all of that, and we still didn't get our box sizing. Did our div get its box sizing? No. I guess while we're looking at that, one thing I did want to take a look at is in my CellComponent. I realized that when I went to bed the other night that I wasn't binding cell value. Let's bind our ng model here. And we need to import that into the module here. And this is the nice thing about WebStorm is that it actually understands Angular really well. And so when I imported that, you'll see that it was smart enough to know that my ng model sits here, and it added it to my import in my ng model. That's one of the things I really like about WebStorm. So we've got it bound to ng model or cell value. Cell value should come in there. And if we look in our story, we didn't set a cell value. There we go. So at least for now, we've got a cell value going on. I'll figure out how to get the box sizing on everything. The border box, that'll be a big help. In the meantime, we can just hack around it by just adding inside of here. We'll just do star border box. So everything inside this component for now will have the border box styling or sizing. And then as we figure it out down the road, I'll report back and let everybody know what I figured out. Our cell is now styled. If we look at our primary cell, it is also styled. We can go ahead and add a value to our primary story. This args, we'll just set cell value to 4. And I broke something again. That's because I put this in the wrong place. Primary dot args. So we've got our cell component, we've got our cell stories. Now if we refresh this, now we have where did my value go? So I've got cell value to 5, and my cell component has an input of cell value. That's interesting. It's set there, and it's set there, but my binding isn't setting it, and I'm not sure why. Template.bind. The props are the args. We'll play with that in a bit. Let's come here and look at the grid and see why the grid isn't working. Because I'd like to get a nice looking grid. So in my grid component stories, got the grid exported. I've got the args on the grid. Really, we're just doing a quick ng4, but we're running it on grid. Our grid component, we're just setting grid to be an array of numbers. Our story is here. Let's just add. Let's just see what happens here. Now we've got something working. We've got cells, but they're not rendering in a grid anymore. My grid is broken. There's some strangeness going on here. Let's look at the grid that we've got set up on this. First, let's take this out. And let's refresh and see if our grid stays here. So we still got our grid. So if we look in our SCSS, that's my cell SCSS. Oh, duh. I guess I only fixed that last time inside of the, is that not like the repeat? That's strange. I wonder why it doesn't like that. So it rebuilt. So it looks like I've got some issues with the way I'm writing my stories. So we'll need to fix those up too. The primary grid, I inspect this and we look at the Sudoku grid. No, repeat is definitely number, comma, value. So we inspect this and we look at here. So we are a grid. Oh, this was right. We weren't using auto columns and auto flow. We were using grid columns with repeat and no grid auto flow. It's grid template columns. That's what we wanted. There we go. That's a lot better. So let's fix up our CSS. I remember we were playing with that in the browser. And now we can take out the auto flow. So now we've got our 9x9 grid. Yay. A bit of struggle going on, but so when we were looking at the cells, one thing I would like to do is make sure that this host is always square. In our wrapper, we made these 2.5 square. So what I would like to do in the grid SCSS, let's just set the height to be and we'll set the width to be the same. And at some point in time, what we will do is we'll move these into a variable that the user can then change to resize the cells in the grid, and everything will resize. That is a little bit bigger than, let's look and see what's going on. So this is our grid right now. Let's dock you to the side here so that I'm not always trying to move around and hide it. So our grid is overflowing because we don't have our border box, right? No, we do have our box settings in border box. Got our cell. They're not square. If we look at that, we're at 37.16 by 41.82. And all of our cells are that size. So we've got our row. Why are we overflowing on the bottom? And this is something you'll quite often ask yourself. That's our problem. So I didn't specify the size of the cell. I just said that it's all one fraction, but really we don't want one fraction. Inside of here, we want a Sudoku cell class that has a height of 2.5 rem and a width of 2.5 rem. And then inside of our GridComponent.html, each of these divs is going to get a class of Sudoku cell. I just assumed they were 2.5. The other thing we can do is we can extract all these 2.5 rems into a variable. So inside of here, we can add a cell size variable. Make that 2.5 rem. And we can just do var cell size. And we can replace that everywhere. And now, if I refresh and we inspect, our grid is more square. That's a good thing. We're still outside of the... Oh, yeah, the reason for that is obvious when I look at it. We've got these 0.2 gutters in between each cell. Each cell is actually larger than the 2.5 rem. The size of this grid actually needs to be 0.2. So we need a plus 0.2 times 8. So it needs another 1.6 rem, I think. Is that the size of this gap? How big is this gap? Oh, I can look it up here. So we set the grid gap to be 0.2 rem. Yeah, and we've got 8 gaps in between. So another thing that we could probably do, we could make a grid gap. Make that 0.2 rem. And we can make this the grid gap. The other thing we can do is move this calc that we're using over and over again. Introduce a CSS variable. We'll replace both occurrences. And we'll make it a local. Oh, it's trying to do, that's ugly. But that's okay. We can make a grid size variable that will be 9 times the cell size plus 8 times grid gap. And these two can be var grid size. And it feels good to be making a little bit of progress, assuming I haven't broken anything. So now, if we come in and we inspect this, so our grid is that big, our Sudoku grid is that big. We fit right inside of the grid. We're slightly taller than wider, but hey, we're at least to a point where we've got a Sudoku grid. One thing that would be nice that you see in a lot of Sudoku applications is thicker lines defining the 3x3 grids within the Sudoku grid, and then thinner lines within the smaller cells. What we can do, let's comment out this right here, and let's do grid template rows, and we're also going to have a repeat of 9x1 fraction. I'm probably making this too hard on myself. I should be using the grid for what it's good for, which is properly sizing things instead of trying to do it myself. So now if we go in and we inspect this, so our cells are pretty close to square, which is good. And our grid, we're slightly off. Why are we slightly off? Well, we're slightly off because we're slightly taller. And I'm willing to bet it's because our box sizing is off. And I just styled one thing. So let's go in and we'll add our box sizing hack also. So so we'll make it all box size border box. We don't need this. We don't need our cell size anymore. Oh, actually we do. No, we actually don't need either of these. And we can just do, we'll leave it for now and we'll figure out how we want to make it square and control the gap size and things like that. But we definitely need those for the math. And now if we refresh and we inspect, so we've got the Sudoku cell, we've got the grid. So we are slightly bigger. And I'm willing to bet it has to do with the size of the input and then the padding of the cell. If we inspect this input, we have the border box and the Sudoku cell. We've got the display and the border box. Take off the display block. It doesn't do anything for us. That doesn't, I mean, it looks pretty good. We're just outside. Working through styling, it's definitely one of the areas where I need to improve. Well, that is a big reason that I accepted the challenge to do this with CSS only, because I definitely need to improve my understanding of the box model, because I know that my issue right here has to do with the box model. For some reason, my grid is not behaving. So I've got my grid size. My columns are one fraction, and this should probably be cell size. And this should also be var cell size, which is then going to force it rather than trying to resize to the content. There we go. That's exactly what we wanted. And that solved a lot of our issue. The grid is now much more square because rather than allowing the rows and the columns to be the size of the content that's within them, we're resizing each cell to be the exact size of the content that we want. This is going to work to our advantage later on when we go and try and resize the grid. We can use our CSS variables that will force our content to be the size that we want. But as it stands right now, this is not bad. We need to add some grid lines so that we can see it.